Tonight you return not to sleep alone, but to yourself. The world behind you has grown quiet now, the clocks, the chatter, the chase. In this gentle pause between day and dream, you are invited inward, not to achieve, not to explain, but to simply be. Let your eyes close like temple doors at dusk. Let your breath fall slowly, like snow settling onto stone. Imagine you are standing barefoot in the courtyard of an old mountain monastery. The sky is soft with twilight. In the distance a bell chimes, not to call but to bless. Somewhere nearby, an old monk sweeps the earth with a straw broom, each stroke as deliberate as a prayer. He does not rush. He does not speak. And in his silence, the whole mountain seems to listen. This is where we begin. You are not here to learn anything new. You are here to remember something ancient, something already woven into the stillness of your being, that the deepest growth does not bloom in noise, but in quiet. That silence is not emptiness, but sacred presence. Let us walk together now through stories that speak softly, but carry the strength of mountains. Tales that drift like incense, circle like wind through pine, and settle like light on water. If this quiet journey speaks to you, share it with someone you love, and remember to subscribe, so we may walk this path together, night after night. Now take a breath, and come with me. For the first story is waiting, one that whispers this silence is not weakness, it is power. As the night deepens and the last sounds of the world begin to quiet, your breath too finds its rhythm, slow, soft, almost like a forgotten melody returning. You are no longer in the noise of the day, no longer caught in the sharp corners of demands and expectations. Instead, you are here, in this still, gentle space where nothing needs to be explained, where nothing needs to be done. Just being is enough. Imagine a courtyard just before dawn, paved with stone worn smooth by countless footsteps that came before you. A thin veil of mist clings to the moss-covered lanterns, and the scent of aged wood mingles with the faint trail of incense smoke from a nearby hall. In this place, no one rushes, no one shouts, even the wind seems to tiptoe. It is here that a truth quietly begins to unfold. Not in words shouted across rooftops, but in a silence so alive it breathes beneath the surface. A silence that does not mean fear, nor withdrawal, nor defeat, but something else, something deeper. Like the mountain that never speaks yet holds the entire valley in its presence. Stay with this stillness, let it cradle your senses. For within this silence, a quiet strength begins to stir, and tonight, you are here to remember it. A long time ago, in a mist-laced village nestled between two forested ridgelines, there was a tea house known not for its menu, but for its silence. The tea master who lived there was said to have once served monks and emperors alike, though he never claimed so. He simply bowed, brewed and poured. No words ever accompanied the steeping of leaves, only the sound of boiling water and the soft clink of ceramic lids resting in place. One day, a young scholar filled with questions and ambition arrived breathless at the tea house. He had studied texts, debated in temples, and longed to learn the deeper truths of the mind. Sitting before the tea master, he spoke of his accomplishments, of the sutras he memorized, of the truths he believed he'd uncovered. The tea master remained silent. Taking up the kettle, he began to pour tea into the scholar's cup. The cup filled, then brimmed, and the tea overflowed. Startled, the young man cried, "Master, the cup is full, it cannot hold more." The old man looked into his eyes, then softly placed the kettle down. Still, he said nothing. It was not until the young man walked home that the message struck like a bell in a quiet hall. His thoughts, his certainties, His words, they were already too full. In his noise, there was no room left to receive anything deeper. The silence of the tea master had not been indifference. It had been instruction. Because sometimes, silence is not the absence of teaching, but the very form of it. In your own life, how often have you spoken to fill a space, to prove your presence, to assure yourself of control? What truths may have passed you by, simply because there was no room left to hold them? Perhaps silence is not passive. Perhaps, like that tea master's stillness, it is a quiet force that asks, what are you still trying to pour into a cup already overflowing? Far from the winding roads of any village, high among a canopy of cedar and wind, there once stood a monastery carved into the side of a forgotten mountain. Time moved differently there. The seasons whispered instead of roared, and footsteps vanished into moss. It was in this monastery that a young monk, barely into his 20s, had come seeking enlightenment, or at least the image of it. Every morning he meditated longer than the others. Every evening he recited the sutras louder. He copied texts with flawless ink strokes, spoke only in quotations, and avoided all small talk, believing it trivial. Others quietly noticed his diligence, but also the tension that surrounded him, like a bowstring pulled too tight for too long. Then one winter, without warning, a storm of unimaginable fury swept across the mountain. Lightning struck the outer wall of the temple dormitories, and in an instant the young monk's hut, the one he had personally built and adorned, caught fire. The flames consumed his scrolls, his altar, his robes, even his most prized text gifted by his teacher. He stood in the snow, barefoot, robes wet, watching everything he had built burn down. He didn't weep, he didn't speak. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say, because there was nothing to say. The next morning, he did not attend morning recitation. He did not bow, or chant, or ask questions. Instead, he walked barefoot into the forest and sat beneath a tree. For hours, then days. It was only in that long silence, stripped of form and pride, that something softened inside him. What he had clung to, what he had loudly declared to be the way, had vanished. And in its place was nothing. Not emptiness, as in loss, but emptiness, as in space, unclaimed, undemanding, unshaken. When the abbot came to visit him, he simply said, "Now your real training begins." In Buddhist teaching, the self we think we are is often a house we build too eagerly, out of knowledge, identity, discipline, and noise. But when that house burns, when control slips away, and words feel meaningless, what's left is the unadorned awareness that was always there. Not your voice, not your posture, not your beliefs, just presence. That is the doorway to what Zen calls no mind, not a lack of intelligence, but a release from the need to always affirm oneself, through speech, through certainty, through sound. And perhaps in your own life, there has been such a burning, a job lost, a role shattered, a story interrupted. When it happened, did you rush to replace it with noise? Or did you, even for a moment, sit quietly with the ashes and listen? When everything you once relied on has been taken from you, what remains that cannot burn? Beyond the edge of a modest village, where wildflowers grew along forgotten paths and crows circled lazily above, there lived a woman known only as the Quiet One. She wasn't born with that name. It was given to her by villagers who, over the years, came to notice how little she said and how deeply she listened. She lived alone in a small wooden house near the forest. Her days passed in silence, tending her garden, feeding the birds, watching the clouds drift across the sky. She never offered advice, never interrupted, never declared what she knew. But whenever someone came with a burden, a lost love, a restless child, a heart fractured by life, they always left lighter, even though she had spoken almost nothing. One rainy evening, a traveling merchant stopped at her gate. He was soaked to the bone, disheveled and impatient, muttering curses at the muddy road, the broken wheel, the unfairness of it all. She opened her door without question and offered him shelter. He talked endlessly about his deals, his ambitions, his cleverness, his disappointments. She served him warm rice and tea, and when he finally paused, she simply said, "The rice is better when not stirred too much." He blinked. That was all, but something in him stopped spiraling. The next morning, before leaving, he asked her, "What are you, really? A healer? A monk in disguise?" She only smiled and said, "A bowl empties itself when placed under running water, but not by talking about how empty it wants to be." He did not understand, not then. But years later, when he had succeeded, then failed, then succeeded again, and grown weary of chasing, he recalled her words, and something clicked, like a lock releasing. In Zen, this is non-doing. The realization that wisdom does not arrive through effort alone, and certainly not through noise. It arises when we stop grasping, stop announcing, stop proving, and simply allow the silence within to echo the silence without. That woman was not powerful because she taught. She was powerful because she embodied what needed no explanation. In her stillness, others felt their own clarity arise. And so we ask not what we must say to be understood, but what we must let go of to finally hear. If you were to live one whole day without speaking, not just to others but even to yourself, what truths might float to the surface? Now the quiet has settled more deeply around you, like the gentle hush of dusk folding over a quiet pond. The stories may seem far away, the tea master's overflowing cup, the young monk's burning hut, the woman whose silence healed more than words ever could, but listen closely and you will find they are not distant at all. They are here. They are you. Perhaps the tea that spilled was not his, but yours, each time you insisted on filling the silence with explanations. Perhaps the hut that burned was the part of you that clung so tightly to being seen, being praised, being known. And perhaps, in the gentlest places of your life, there has been someone or something that asked nothing of you except to be present and to notice what lives in stillness. Silence is not what happens when noise ends. It is the quiet force that has been there all along, beneath the words, beneath the effort, beneath the need to become. It is the mountain under the mist, unmoved. It is the moon, reflected in still water, never grasped yet, always present. And in this very moment, as you lie still, you are not asked to understand it fully. You are simply invited to feel it. The strength that doesn't announce itself, the wisdom that arises when nothing is pushed. So we do not ask, "What should I say next?" But instead, what if tonight you let the silence speak for you? What if your deepest strength has nothing to do with words at all? So now, with everything said, it is time to say nothing. Let the breath come, then go, slow, like the wind brushing over pine needles in an empty grove. You are not asked to hold on to anything, not even understanding, not even the stories. Let them drift like lanterns across the surface of your awareness, beautiful but ungrasped. The tea has been poured, the hut has burned, the silence has spoken. There is no next step to take, no lesson to summarize, only this stillness where nothing more is needed. And in this stillness, you are not falling asleep, you are returning.
returning to that quiet part of you that never left, only waited. Feel the space between each thought grow wider, like ripples dissolving into still water. Feel the warmth of your body resting in trust. Feel how even now, without saying a word, you are whole. You do not need to defend. You do not need to explain. You do not need to be known, because the truth of you, the strength of you, the silence of you is already here. Let the night wrap around you like a robe spun from breath and moonlight. Let it all go, and let your next journey begin, not in sound, but in stillness.
And now, like mist shifting gently from one mountain ridge to the next, we arrive at another quiet turning. The stories you've heard may still be echoing faintly in the folds of your breath, like distant chimes swaying in a breeze. Let them settle as you do, resting deeper into your body, into the stillness beneath all effort. Imagine now that you are walking through an old orchard at dawn. The trees are bare, but not barren, each branch heavy with invisible promise. You pause beside one tree in particular, where a bud barely swells at the tip. No bird sings, no leaf rustles. There is only the hush of becoming, of life that has not yet revealed itself. Here, in this space of almost, a different kind of wisdom begins to bloom. Not the kind that rushes to be heard, nor the kind that trembles for recognition, but the wisdom of holding close what is sacred, the wisdom of waiting, the wisdom of guarding what has not yet fully formed. For some truths are like seeds in winter, too tender to be spoken aloud, too new to be shared, and what is not yet rooted can be easily swept away by even the gentlest breath of doubt. So tonight we will sit together beside these invisible seeds and remember this, that not all things are meant to be spoken too soon. Some dreams, like blossoms, open only in silence. You find yourself beneath the shelter of a tiled roof, its edges softened by the passage of time. Rain taps gently against the wooden beams, the kind of slow, deliberate rhythm that makes the air feel slower, heavier, more sacred. In the dim light, the scent of damp earth and sandalwood fills your lungs, and before you, a monk is sweeping the temple courtyard, not hurriedly, but as though each stroke of the broom carries the weight of a prayer. Years ago, there was a young novice in this very temple. Eager, bright-eyed, brimming with aspirations, he longed to prove himself. When asked why he had come to the path, he always answered with conviction, to attain enlightenment and to help others do the same. His sincerity was undeniable, but his restlessness even more so. One spring morning, while the abbot was trimming bonsai in silence, the novice approached and knelt, declaring, "Master, I have decided. I will travel to the southern provinces to share the Dharma. The people there are lost and need guidance. I must go." The old abbot said nothing. Instead, he gestured toward a nearby potted plant, a tender sapling growing in a glazed earthen bowl. The novice looked at it, confused. The master simply said, "Would you uproot this tree while its roots are still young and plant it in unfamiliar soil just because the sun shines brighter elsewhere?" The novice blinked. He had no answer. That night, he remained in the garden long after the lanterns had dimmed. He thought of all he wanted to achieve, not out of vanity, but out of yearning. Yet he began to wonder what part of him wanted to serve and what part needed to be seen doing it. He stayed, and for many years, he did not speak of his plans again. Sometimes, our intentions are noble, but our timing is immature. Like seeds dug up too soon, dreams spoken prematurely are exposed to winds they are not yet strong enough to withstand. And often, in our rush to be heard, we forget that not every soul who listens will understand. Some may judge, some may doubt, and even silence can bruise what was still blooming. So we pause, and we ask gently, what part of you is seeking light before your roots have fully deepened into the dark? Far from the village paths, beyond the footbridges and rice fields, there stood an abandoned hermitage carved into a stone hillside. Its door had long been eaten away by time, its steps cradled in moss. But one day, on the edge of exhaustion and despair, a traveler stumbled upon it and chose to stay. He had once been a merchant, known across 3 provinces for his sharp mind and sharper tongue. His ambitions had burned bright and loud. He built his empire on words, convincing, promising, boasting, persuading, and for a while, he succeeded. People praised his vision. He spoke often about what he would become, but as quickly as it rose, it crumbled. A betrayal by a partner, a sudden collapse in the markets, whispers behind his back, and just like that, the applause faded. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was terrifying. He came to the hermitage, not for wisdom but to hide. He brought with him scrolls, records, and a chest full of memories, all wrapped in silence. For weeks he spoke to no one. For months, no one came. One morning, sitting by the cracked stone basin that once caught rainwater, he watched a crow land beside a broken clay bowl. The crow pecked, waited, then flew off again. The man looked down and muttered, "Even emptiness has no use for me." At that moment the wind shifted, and a single red leaf, the first of autumn, fell into the basin's center, creating a ripple that seemed impossibly wide for such a small thing, and something in him broke open. He realized it had not been the failure that undid him. It was his need to be seen, to be praised, to be understood, and that need had made him share too soon. Share plans before they were formed, truths before they were real. Every time he spoke his dreams, they became weaker, not stronger. In Buddhist thought, this moment is what's known as letting go of the illusion of control through expression. Not all truth requires a voice. Some truths ripen best in stillness, fed not by attention, but by the absence of it. Like tea steeped in silence, wisdom deepens when left alone. That man remained at the hermitage through 6 winters. He rebuilt it slowly, not for visitors, not for recognition, but for the sake of the wind, the rain, and the discipline of quiet work. And when villagers later spoke of the beautiful stone refuge that had once again begun to ring softly with the sound of meditation bells, they never knew who lived there. He had become the silence he once feared. And so we might wonder, how much of what you say is to affirm your dream, and how much is to ask others to believe it for you? At the far end of a winding path lined with fallen camellia petals, there was an old well that never ran dry. Beside it lived an elderly woman in a weathered cottage whose walls leaned slightly with age, as if tired but still listening. She spoke little, and few visited her, save for children drawn by the warmth of her sweet rice cakes and the stray cat who slept in her lap every morning. No one knew her past. Some said she had once been the wife of a wealthy man who disappeared into the forest and never returned. Others whispered that she had studied with monks but never wore the robes, but she never confirmed nor denied. She simply offered tea, nodded when spoken to, and returned to her tasks, chopping wood, drying herbs, sweeping her stone steps with the patience of falling leaves. One spring evening, a young man came to her door. He had traveled far, carrying a heavy satchel of scrolls and maps, his eyes burning with purpose. "I'm building a great center for learning," he said quickly. "A place where people can come to understand truth. But the elders mock me. They don't see my vision. I thought, perhaps you might understand." The woman poured tea into 2 cups, one for him, one for herself. They sat in silence. The fire crackled low. She asked only one question, "And what will the truth do once it is understood?" "It will spread," he said. "It will change everything." She smiled. Like smoke escaping a fire, or mist rising before dawn? He didn't know how to answer. After some time, she walked him to the edge of her garden, where a single plum blossom had bloomed early, delicate and pink, against the grey sky. "This tree," she said softly, "flowers whether anyone is watching or not." He nodded slowly, the wind catching the edge of one of his scrolls and pulling it from his pack. It landed in the well, sank, and disappeared, but he did not reach for it. From that night onward, the young man visited her once each season. He spoke less each time, until finally they only shared tea. This, too, is a form of knowing, when you no longer need to explain your vision, when your trust in it runs deeper than your need to speak it aloud. In the stillness of that garden, he discovered that clarity doesn't grow by convincing others, but by tending quietly to what is alive in your own heart. And so this moment whispers to you now, what would you stop trying to prove if you no longer needed anyone to understand? As the stories settle like fine dust on the floor of your awareness, their quiet echoes return, a novice silenced by a question he could not answer. A broken man who learned to build without an audience, a blossom blooming without witness in an old woman's garden. Each carried a dream, sincere, tender, and alive. But each dream was protected, not through sharing, but through stillness. What was spoken too early could unravel, but what was held close, like a flame cupped gently in both hands, grew strong enough to light the way. The young monk learned that speaking of service before one has truly anchored themselves in understanding is like trying to teach from an unsteady boat. You risk capsizing not only yourself, but others as well. The merchant found that a voice once used to impress could also be the very thing that undid him, and in the silence of his ruin, he discovered a kind of wealth that no coin could buy. The seeker with the scrolls arrived hoping to be affirmed, but left with something better. A reminder that growth is not always seen, and truth is not always said. These are not just parables from some faraway time. Their breath moves through your own life too. How many of your hopes have you spoken into the world, not because they were ready, but because you were? And if you quiet yourself now, if you listen beneath the noise of expectation, is there something inside you still forming? Something tender, delicate, still in its early unfolding, asking not to be named, but to be nurtured. Can you feel it, that silent knowing, waiting patiently behind the words? So now, let it all fall away. Let the names, the plans, the imagined conversations drift like autumn leaves across the slow-moving surface of your breath. There is no longer a need to hold your vision up for others to see, no longer a need to explain the shape of what is still becoming. It is enough to feel it, quietly, inwardly, like the warmth of sun through closed eyes. Guarding your vision is not secrecy, it is reverence. It is bowing to the sacred process of becoming, and knowing that what is precious blooms best in silence. Stay here, let your body soften, your thoughts loosen. Let the pulse of the stories echo like footsteps fading down a forest path, leaving you not with answers, but with a deeper kind of stillness. And if the world asks what you're building, smile gently and return to your breath. There is nothing more to say, only the hush before dawn, only the roots deepening in the dark, only the quiet power of becoming. Let silence hold you, let sleep come, let your next dream be tended in stillness. From the silence we've just touched, something even deeper now begins to call, like the hush that follows the last note of a bell. This next unfolding comes not to teach you something new, but to remind you of what you've always known, though you may have forgotten. Imagine walking alone through a pine forest just before dawn. The world hasn't stirred yet. No birds, no wind. Just the sound of your own breath mingling with the scent of cool resin and earth. As you walk, the path disappears into fog, and there are no signs, no voices, no audience. Only you and the rhythm of your feet on the softened ground. This is where real strength lives. Not in the spotlight, not in applause, but in places unseen. In the quiet choices, the silent disciplines, the patient acts that bear no witness. Like roots growing deep into the dark before a tree ever breaks the surface, true power rarely arrives with fanfare. It builds quietly, below perception. It does not seek recognition because it does not need it. So tonight, we enter those unseen chambers, the ones where greatness takes form not through performance, but through presence. Let your breath slow even more, and step with me into the shadows where real power lives. In a remote village carved into the slopes of mist-covered hills, there stood a modest temple shaded by cypress trees. Within it lived an old monk, who was neither abbot nor scholar, but simply the one who rose first each day to sweep the leaves before the rest awoke. No one ever asked his name. Few even noticed him. Though the temple grounds were always immaculately clean, the lanterns always lit before dusk, and the bowls always warm by morning. One year, the province received word that a great master would visit from the capital. The temple stirred with anticipation. The monks prepared lectures, polished altars, and rehearsed their chants. Each wanted to be noticed, to impress, to perhaps be chosen for a journey to the royal monastery. The old monk said nothing. He continued to sweep leaves at dawn, light incense before first bell, and sit in meditation when the corridors were still silent. When the master finally arrived, he observed the temple in silence. He walked slowly through the gardens, paused by the lanterns, touched the worn broom, leaning against the courtyard wall. He listened not to the chanting, but to the space between the words. At the final gathering, as expected, each monk took turns speaking. They recited passages, explained sutras, demonstrated their insights. The hall filled with voices, but the master said little, until, at the very end, he turned and asked, "Who tends the silence here?" The monks looked at one another. No one answered. Then slowly the old monk stepped forward, bowing once. His robes were plain, his gaze steady. The master simply nodded. "Ah," he said, "then the temple is in good hands." The next morning, the old monk was gone. No farewell, no ceremony. Just the sound of leaves blowing through an empty courtyard, swept even in his absence. It's often said that thunder announces itself, but the roots of mountains make no sound. Real power doesn't declare itself. It does not need permission or applause. It shapes the world quietly, from underneath. And so we may ask ourselves, with humility, when no one is watching, who are you still willing to be? At the edge of the southern forests, where the river bent like a sleeping dragon and mist coiled above its surface like breath, there once lived a potter in a clay-walled hut. He was neither rich nor spoken of, and his work bore no seal. Yet for generations monks from distant monasteries traveled by foot just to drink tea from the bowls he made. He never spoke of his methods, never invited apprentices. Each morning he walked barefoot to the river to fetch water, then returned to his wheel. His bowls bore tiny imperfections, a faint ripple here, a thumbprint there, but they sat in the hand like something remembered from another life. One year a drought struck the region. Crops failed, merchants fled, the roads emptied. The potter too stopped shaping clay. The river had receded to a trickle. He sat for weeks in silence, the wheel untouched. Villagers came, urging him to sell what remained. "Your bowls are famous," they insisted. "We can carry them to the cities."
You could finally be known, rewarded, respected. But he shook his head gently, saying only, "A bowl without water is just a shape." One evening, as he watched the cracked earth beneath his feet, a realization ripened, not in words, but in the marrow of his being. He had always thought his gift was in forming the clay, but what he truly shaped was the space inside it, the quiet, invisible emptiness that held something sacred. And now, with no water to carry, no wheel to turn, no fame to chase, he felt the vast stillness within himself become the true vessel. He never made another bowl again. Yet when the rains returned a year later, his hut was still there, quiet and whole, and somehow that was enough. In Zen, this is the return to Mu, the nothingness that is not empty, but full of formless potential. The potter did not lose his power in the absence of his craft. He became it, beyond title, beyond task, beyond recognition. Because the loudest achievements often ring hollow, but quiet mastery, the kind that shapes without needing to be seen, never fades. And so tonight, perhaps ask not what you will create, but what you are already holding in the silence of your hands. If no one were to ever see your work, would you still shape the bowl?
At the base of a wind-worn mountain, where fields of wild grass bowed gently to the breeze, there stood a hut so quiet that even the birds seemed to lower their songs when they passed above. Within that hut lived an old man with silver hair tied in a loose knot and hands like weathered bark. He spoke to no one, though many had tried. Travelers left offerings at his gate, fruits, rice, even questions written on folded cloth, but no answers ever came, only silence. Many believed he was once a warrior, others a poet. No one knew for sure, and after a while no one asked. They simply came to sit. Each evening, just as the sun slipped behind the hills, the old man stepped out with a wooden ladle. He knelt beside a stone basin outside his hut and poured water into it. 3 gentle scoops. Then he returned inside, never looking back. This continued for years. One day, a young monk, curious and sincere, came to watch. He waited at a respectful distance, observing quietly as the old man performed his ritual. After several days, he finally approached, bowing low. "Master," he said softly, "what is the meaning of this act? For whom is the water poured?" The old man looked at him, his eyes clear but unreadable. He answered, "For the wind." The monk blinked. "But the wind does not drink." The old man smiled faintly. "And yet, it moves the world." That night, the monk slept beneath the stars, listening to the wind swirl through the grass, hearing in its unseen currents a power beyond grasp, beyond needing to be seen or understood. When we act without desire for recognition, when we move without need for validation, we enter the realm of true doing, the effortless arising of presence from stillness. That old man's power was not in what he gave, but in how freely he gave it, with no need for eyes, no audience, no reward. He had become like the wind, quiet, unseen, yet touching everything. And so, gently now, let yourself wonder what within you is willing to give, even if no one ever knows you gave it. Now the hush within you is no longer unfamiliar. It has become something tender, something known. The stories linger like footprints on soft earth. The monk who swept before dawn, shaping peace without a name. The potter who, in losing his craft, discovered the vessel within. The old man who poured water for the wind, not to be seen, but simply to offer. What do they share? They do not strive to be noticed. They do not declare. They do not ask the world to listen. And yet the world listens all the same, because real power never needs to raise its voice. True strength, the kind that endures, is forged in shadows, in unseen moments, in the small choices made without witness, in the patience to keep walking, even when no one is watching. We live in a world that often confuses visibility with value, but the roots of a great tree lie hidden. The stillness of a mountain gives it its majesty, and the moon's pull on the ocean leaves no sound, yet it moves everything. So pause now, and let these questions breathe quietly in you. What are you still trying to prove, and to whom? If no one ever noticed your effort, would you still give it your all? And in the dim corners of your life, the unseen, the unspoken, what silent force is already blooming? There is power in your quiet. Let it rise without noise. So now let yourself become like the shadow that lengthens before dusk, not seeking light, not hiding from it, simply being what it is. Let go of the need to be understood. Let go of the quiet ache for recognition. There is nothing left to do, only to rest. Let your breath move like a breeze through tall grass. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a sky that asks nothing of them. You are not waiting for permission. You are not proving your worth. You are simply here, in this silence, where power has always lived. And perhaps that is the secret, not to shine more brightly, but to learn how to glow quietly in the dark. No more reaching, no more explaining, only the gentle knowing that real strength does not announce itself. It endures, it creates, it moves, unseen, but undeniable. Let the silence cradle you now. Let your body soften, let the night receive you, and let whatever grows within you grow quietly. As the stillness deepens and your breath moves like soft wind through tall reeds, another truth rises gently to the surface, not to demand your attention, but to remind you of something often forgotten. Just beneath your skin, in the quiet current of your presence, lives the most sacred resource you possess, your energy. Not the kind of energy that is loud or fast or praised in crowds, but the subtle kind, the warmth in your chest when you feel safe, the quiet pulse of purpose that moves you forward even when no one is watching. It is the energy that fuels your attention, your love, your devotion, and when it is protected, you feel whole. When it is scattered, you begin to forget who you are. Tonight we return to the sacredness of that life force, the simple, unseen current that animates your every choice, not to grasp it, not to control it, but to remember that not everything deserves your reaction, your explanation, your light. So let yourself settle, like dew on a leaf at dawn, and step softly now into the temple of your own breath, where every moment becomes an altar for the energy you choose to protect. In the heart of an old village, surrounded by fields that turned gold each autumn, there lived a lantern maker. She was known not for crafting elaborate designs, but for the still glow her lanterns carried. No flickering, no smoke, just a soft, steady flame that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the evening wind. Each morning, she would rise before the sun, sweep the courtyard with a straw broom, and light one lantern in the workshop, not to see better, but to feel the day begin. She spoke little, smiled often, and never rushed. Her energy felt like warm tea, never too much, never too little. One day, a man from the city came, a merchant used to shouting over crowds and moving faster than his own thoughts. He offered her a deal. "I can make you famous," he said, unfurling contracts and promises. "Your lanterns in every province, wealth, recognition, power." She listened, poured him tea, let him speak. Then she stood, walked to the lantern she'd lit that morning, and cupped her hands gently around the flame. "Do you see this?" she asked. "It lights the room, but only because it is sheltered. If I carried it into every street, let every wind touch it, how long do you think it would last?" The man said nothing. She added softly, "I do not fear being seen. I fear losing the quiet that lets me create." He left empty-handed. That evening, her courtyard glowed again, not with ambition, but with peace. We often forget that our energy is not infinite, that attention given too freely, responses offered too quickly, and openness shared too easily are like cracks in a cup. No matter how much we pour in, it never stays full. The lantern maker did not say no out of arrogance. She said no out of reverence, for the sacred rhythm that kept her inner flame steady. And perhaps now, with your own breath in your hands, a small flame glowing behind your ribs, you might ask, what have you been giving your light to that has not sheltered it in return? High among the pines, where the fog drapes the cliffs like tattered silk, there once lived a hermit in a wooden hut, built by hand. The beams creaked in the wind, and the roof leaked in spring, but within those worn walls was a silence so complete, it hummed with presence. He had not always lived this way. In his younger years, he was known in the city as a brilliant speaker, eloquent, clever, admired. His lectures filled halls, his voice moved minds. But slowly, over years of performing wisdom, something began to fray inside him. The more he shared, the less he felt. The more he impressed, the more hollow he became. Until one day, mid-sentence on a stage of applause, his voice simply stopped. He bowed, left the hall, and never returned. No one knew where he went, only that he vanished. In the quiet years that followed, far from questions and crowds, he began to hear again, not voices, not ideas, but the thrum of his own breath, the groan of trees in winter, the drip of snow melting from eaves. And slowly, something healed. Not because he discovered something new, but because he stopped spending energy trying to be understood. One spring, a wandering monk passed by and recognized him. Bowing low, he asked, "Why did you abandon the world when you had so much to give?" The hermit placed a pot on the fire, looked up with eyes clear and calm, and said, "I was pouring from an empty bowl." It took silence to fill it again. In Zen, this is the turning, the moment when doing becomes non-doing, when effort gives way to essence, when the soul no longer dances to the noise of the world, but moves by the breath of its own wind. We each carry a cup within, and though it is invisible, it empties just the same. And if we are not careful, if we give too much without returning to stillness, we find ourselves dry in a world that only wants more. So pause with me now and feel into the edges of your own energy. What are you still trying to pour, and from what kind of bowl? There was once a woman who lived at the edge of a stone path that led nowhere in particular. Her house was small, almost hidden by flowering bushes and old trees that grew in tangled reverence. Birds nested in the beams above her porch, and the moss between her garden stones held the stories of decades untold. She had no family, no title, no possessions worth mentioning, only a rhythm. Each day began with walking barefoot to the stream, placing her hands into the cold current, then returning to sweep her steps with a branch broom bound in silence. Strangers would occasionally wander by, often lost or weary. She never turned them away, but she also never tried to fix them. She offered tea, a seat beneath the plum tree, and then said nothing. Not out of rudeness, but out of deep, grounded presence. One rainy evening, a young traveler collapsed on her porch, shaking from exhaustion and rage. "Everyone takes something from me," he spat. "My time, my energy, my trust. I keep giving, and they keep asking. I'm tired of being strong." She listened, then rose slowly, went inside, and returned with a cracked bowl. Inside it, a tiny sprout, growing from soil so dark it looked like ink. "I've poured nothing into this bowl for months," she said, "but I've let the sun, the silence and the stillness have their way. The traveler didn't understand, not at first. But when he woke the next morning, dry, warm, and quiet inside, he no longer needed an explanation. He only nodded, touched the rim of the bowl, and whispered, "I see." Sometimes, protecting our energy doesn't look like building walls. It looks like tending our own soil, letting things grow unseen, saying less, offering only when the giving flows from fullness. This woman, in her quiet watchfulness, gave the world what was rare, the space to come undone, without being drained. And now you might wonder, what would begin to bloom again, if you stopped offering yourself to everything that asks? Now, feel how the thread has gently wound itself around you, not to bind, but to hold. A lantern's guarded flame, a hermit's quiet bowl, a woman's unspoken garden. Each story lit a different corner of the same truth. Your energy is sacred, not sacred because it is rare, but because it is yours. You've likely felt it, that dull exhaustion after a conversation where your heart was never really heard, or the quiet ache after giving too much to someone who never asked how you were. We often think fatigue is physical, but more often it is spiritual, a quiet depletion of light from within. The lantern maker taught us that not everything that glitters deserves our flame. The hermit revealed that even the wisest voice must sometimes retreat to refill its breath. The old woman on the porch showed us that strength is not in fixing others, but in holding space for what needs no fixing. And in your life, how often have you given your light to what could not reflect it? How often have you poured from your bowl before tasting your own silence? Energy, in its purest form, does not rush. It listens, it ripens, it knows when to say no, not out of fear, but out of knowing that true giving is never frantic, never forced. It overflows from a center that is undisturbed. So perhaps now, as you lie still beneath the soft blanket of your breath, you can ask yourself with kindness, where do I truly want my light to go? And just as gently, what within me longs to be protected, not from others, but from my own forgetting. Let it all soften now. Let the light within you dim, not to vanish, but to return to its source, steady, silent, whole. There is no need to give right now, no need to explain, to shine, to hold anything up for the world to see. Just breathe, slowly, as if each breath is a quiet bow to your own sacredness. Feel your body settle like leaves at the bottom of a still pond. Nothing stirs, nothing presses. And in this hush, you begin to remember, you do not owe every knock on your door an answer. You do not owe your energy to every call for attention. What is meant for you will find you, not through effort, but through alignment. Let this moment become your shelter. Let this silence become your boundary. Let your breath become the guardian of your light. There is nothing more to protect now, because you have already returned to yourself. From the quiet chambers where your energy has been gently restored, a new kind of silence now begins to rise, not the silence of withholding, but of listening. The kind of silence that doesn't seek to protect, but to receive. You've journeyed through the forests of restraint, of unseen power, of sacred boundary, and now you arrive at the innermost clearing, still, unshaken, and open. Imagine sitting by a calm lake before sunrise. The sky is still dark, yet soft light presses faintly at the edges of the horizon. You're not doing anything, just sitting. The water is perfectly still, and because of that stillness, it mirrors everything. The trees, the clouds, even the movement of your own breath. This is the place we now enter together. Stillness is not just a lack of motion, It is a space where the noise within begins to settle, and something else, something ancient and quiet and true, begins to emerge. You don't need to force it. You don't need to name it. All that is asked of you is to be here, to rest into this moment, to listen beyond the noise, because in that listening, you begin to hear yourself again. It is late afternoon in a quiet garden behind a weathered temple. The sky is veiled in a thin golden haze, and the scent of fresh sandalwood curls slowly from a censer by the moss-covered steps. A single bell chimes in the distance, not to call anyone, but simply to echo, a sound that knows itself has no need to explain. In this garden, a young nun kneels beside a small koi pond, her hands motionless on her lap. Her master has given her a koan, a riddle not meant to be solved, but to be lived. "What is the sound of the heart before it speaks?" he had asked. She meditates on it day and night, writing pages of reflection, dissecting meanings, quoting scriptures, even dreaming of possible answers. Yet none satisfy her master. Each time she offers a response, he remains silent, simply sweeping the fallen plum blossoms from the courtyard floor. Frustration grows. Doubt creeps in. One morning she rises before dawn and makes her way to the garden, not to meditate, but just to sit. No questioning, no seeking, no answering, just breath, just the morning bird song echoing faintly through bamboo. And as her gaze softens onto the surface of the pond, she notices something strange. Her reflection, once distorted by the ripples, is perfectly clear. It's not because the water changed, but because she finally stopped stirring it. In that moment, a quiet warmth expands inside her, not a conclusion, but an understanding. Not a solution, but a recognition. She doesn't rush to share it. She simply bows to the water. Stillness had not been a method to find the answer. Stillness was the answer, because when the inner world is no longer disturbed by the need to know, something deeper emerges, a listening that doesn't need words. And so perhaps tonight, with your thoughts beginning to settle like petals on water, you might also ask gently, what have you been trying to hear? Through all the noise you've been making. The road twisted through pine and stone until it reached the foot of a mountain where travelers rarely passed. There, tucked into the slope, stood a small hut with a crooked roof and a doorway that never closed all the way. The man who lived inside had once been a well-known healer. People said he could mend anything, but now he lived alone, speaking to no one. He hadn't always been silent. In the city, his name had been carried from house to house like a blessing. People came to him with sorrow, with pain, with confusion, and he listened, advised, fixed. Until one day, a woman came, not for herself, but for her son, who had lost the will to live. She begged him to help. He did all he knew, herbs, stories, presents, prayer, but the boy never spoke. He faded quietly, like mist, and left only silence behind. The healer, once certain, now doubted everything. He walked out of the city without a destination and kept walking until the world forgot his name. He found the hut by accident, or maybe it found him. He tended it like one tends a wound, with gentleness, with patience, with no need to explain. The years passed. One spring, a storm tore through the mountain. A child from a nearby village was separated from his family and wandered to the hut, cold and sobbing. The healer wrapped the boy in warm cloth, fed him broth, and stayed beside him through the night, never asking a single question. At dawn, the boy stopped crying. He looked at the old man and whispered, "You're very quiet." The healer smiled and said, "That's how I listen now." In that moment, something in him finally settled, not because he had found the right thing to say,
but because he had let go of needing to say anything at all. His silence no longer came from grief, but from presence. In Zen, this is the way of letting go into listening, the kind of listening that doesn't seek to fix, to frame, or to prove. It receives. It allows. It understands that some truths bloom only in the soil of stillness. The healer never returned to the city. He didn't need to, and maybe you don't either. Not in the way you once thought. What part of you has been waiting, not for more answers, but for less noise?
Just beyond the ridge where the wildflowers bloom even in winter's breath, there is a clearing where no path is marked, only grass flattened by the wind and stories whispered by crows. Here, an old woman once built her life from nothing but time and attention. She was not a teacher, though many came to her for answers. She was not a recluse, though she rarely left the clearing. Her days were spent gathering firewood, tending to the vegetables she grew in silence, and watching the shadows shift across the mountainsides. A visitor once came, a young woman trembling with questions. Her heart was loud, full of pain she could not name, and a mind restless from seeking. "Tell me," she pleaded, "what should I do? How do I find my path, my voice, my peace?" The old woman motioned for her to sit. She offered a bowl of warm rice, a stone to rest her back against, and then simply returned to pulling weeds. Her back hunched like the curve of the moon. Hours passed. No answers were given. That night, the young woman awoke to the sound of rain on the roof and the soft crackle of firewood. There was no movement, no speech, only a stillness so deep it wrapped around her like an old blanket, long forgotten. For the first time in years she wept, not from sorrow but from the relief of no longer needing to explain herself. In the morning she asked, "Why didn't you speak?" The old woman smiled gently. "Because I wanted you to hear the voice that's been waiting for you, beneath all the others." The young woman never forgot. Not the silence, not the taste of rice, not the way her own breath had finally returned home. There is a knowing inside you too, one that doesn't need new information, only less interruption. And it will not shout. It will not chase. It will wait, patiently, until the world quiets enough for you to return. So now, as your body sinks deeper into stillness, what wisdom in you have you been too busy to hear? Now, as the stories dissolve into the hush of your breath, a deeper thread begins to shimmer, not in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. A reflection in still water, a silence beside a fire, a presence that asked nothing, yet gave everything. Each moment unfolded, not through answers but through absence, not through guidance, but through space. The young nun discovered that clarity didn't arrive through effort, but through the ceasing of effort. The healer learned that peace doesn't require fixing, only the willingness to stay present. And the woman in the clearing, she reminded us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer another is your silence. Stillness isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. A doorway into the parts of ourselves long buried under noise, urgency, and the constant need to be understood. But in the quiet, the deeper voice returns. The one that isn't shaped by opinion or fear. The one that has always been there waiting, not to speak first, but to be heard last. And so, as you rest now, you might begin to wonder, what in your life is asking for stillness? Not so it can disappear, but so it can finally be seen. What might you rediscover, not by searching harder, but by listening softer? Let it all fall away now. The questions, the seeking, even the stories. Let them settle like snowflakes on a silent field, untouched, unmoved. You are no longer reaching outward. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to fix. Only this,
the quiet rise and fall of your breath, like waves folding back into the shore. And in that breath, you begin to remember the voice you were searching for was never out there. It has always been here, beneath the noise, beneath the hurry, waiting patiently in the stillness. Let the silence deepen. Let your mind soften. Let your heart loosen its grip. You do not need to understand anything tonight. You only need to rest. Because sometimes the deepest healing does not come through effort, but through the courage to be quiet enough to hear what has always been yours.
And from the still waters where your inner voice has gently returned, we now step into a new space, one that asks not for words but for the quiet certainty of self. You've heard the silence that heals, you've touched the energy that must be protected. And now something deeper begins to unfold. A boundary not drawn in stone, but in breath. Picture yourself in a vast meadow at dusk. The sky is fading to indigo, and around you, wild grasses sway without direction. There's no one near, no questions, no names. And yet, you feel utterly complete. You do not need to justify your presence here. You do not need to explain your choices to the wind, to the stars, or to the earth beneath your bare feet. This is the truth we walk toward tonight, that you owe no one your explanations. Not because you are closing off, but because what is sacred does not need to be defended. Let yourself rest into this knowing that your path, your pace, your peace are valid, even if no one else sees them clearly, even if no one else ever will. The moon had just begun to rise over the quiet hills of a small farming village, casting long shadows across the terraced fields. The scent of damp earth lingered in the air, mingling with the distant sound of wooden wind chimes, swaying gently outside a cottage near the edge of the forest. Inside, a young man sat cross-legged on the floor, fidgeting with the loose threads of his robe, eyes darting between the flickering candlelight and the elder monk across from him. He had come with urgency, his heart full of questions. "Master," he began, "they misunderstand me. My parents say I am wasting my time. My friends think I've lost my mind. I try to explain. I tell them what I'm learning here, the peace I'm finding. But they shake their heads, and the more I speak, the more they turn away." The old monk, weathered by decades of silent mornings and wind-chapped winters, looked at him kindly, then reached for the teapot. He poured the tea slowly, steam curling upward like soft prayers. No answer came, only silence. He handed the cup to the young man and said, "Drink." The young man took the cup, confused but obeyed. After a few sips, the elder smiled. "The tea doesn't need to explain its warmth," he said. "It simply warms." The young man blinked. A soft ache stirred in his chest, not from hurt, but from recognition. We often speak not to inform, but to be seen. We try to explain our path in hopes that someone will nod, affirm, understand. But the truth is, not every heart is ready to hear what yours has already lived. Not every soul will walk beside you. And that is not a failure. It is simply a divergence in unfolding. So now, with your breath soft and your shoulders lighter, let this question rise gently. What truth within you are you still trying to explain when it only needs to be lived? At the edge of a mountain pass, often forgotten by maps, there once lived a stonecutter in a hut, carved halfway into the rock. His life was simple: rise with the first light, chisel and shape stones by hand, then return to his fire with the coming dusk. He never ventured far, he never argued prices, and he never spoke of what he believed. In his youth, he had been louder. He tried to make others see the sacredness of silence, the value of steady work. He would speak passionately at village gatherings, defend his views, even debate travelers who passed through. But the more he tried to convince, the more distant he felt from himself. It was as if each word pulled him further from the quiet truth he was trying to share. Then one season, after a harsh winter, a large boulder fell from a cliffside, crashing through his garden and cracking the wall of his hut. A group of villagers came, offering advice, sympathy, and plans. "You must write to the officials," they said. "Explain why this happened. Demand protection, compensation." But the stonecutter only bowed. With the same tools he used for years, he began clearing the rubble. Day by day, no anger, no complaints, no explanation. A traveler passing by asked, "Why don't you say something? Don't you want justice?" The stonecutter looked up, his hands caked in dust, his face calm. "I don't need to explain why I keep working," he said. "This wall knows, so do my hands." In Buddhism, there is a path beyond the grasping mind, where the need to justify, to prove, to perform begins to dissolve. This is not passivity, it is clarity, a letting go of the illusion that our truths must always be spoken to be real. Sometimes it is only when we stop explaining that we finally begin to embody. And so now, in the space between your thoughts, feel into this, what might rebuild itself in your life if you stop justifying and simply kept going. In a quiet village by the sea, where the waves whispered secrets into the cliffs and the horizon seemed to stretch forever, there lived a seamstress known not by her name, but by her silence. She stitched robes for monks and sails for fishermen, yet no one could recall a single opinion she had ever voiced. One spring, a group of newcomers arrived, merchants and teachers, all full of ideas and eager to reshape the village into something greater. They brought proposals, meetings, banners, and plans for roads and new markets. They spoke passionately about progress, urging everyone to vote, to join, to choose. They came to the seamstress's door with papers in hand and words practiced like performance. "What do you believe?" they asked. "Which side will you stand on?" She looked up from the garment in her lap, smiled gently, and said nothing. Instead, she turned back to her thread, tying a small knot, as if concluding a sentence only she could hear. One of them grew irritated. "You have a voice. Use it." But she just breathed softly, eyes calm. "My voice is in the way I stitch. You're wearing it." They left, unsatisfied. That winter, storms battered the coastline. Many sails tore. Robes were soaked. The village endured, not because of speeches, but because of what had been quietly mended, stitch by invisible stitch. In the spring, when the visitors had long gone, someone placed a hand over their chest and whispered, "She was right here, all along." We often mistake silence for absence, but sometimes it is the purest form of presence, a quiet that refuses to divide, to perform, to defend, a truth that does not stand in opposition because it simply is. And maybe now, as you lie in the quiet of your own breath, you can feel it too. What part of you no longer needs to take a side because it already knows where it stands? Now the thread of quiet clarity has woven itself gently through your chest, a young man's tea, warm but unexplained, a stonecutter's silence, more enduring than walls, a seamstress whose presence needed no declaration. Each moved not with noise, but with knowing, not with defense, but with devotion. And so we return to the still center of this truth. You owe no one your explanations. Your breath is enough. Your being is enough. Your path, slow, unseen, misunderstood by others, is still sacred. You've likely felt the ache of being misunderstood, the tension of wanting others to see what you see, feel what you feel, affirm your direction. It is human, it is tender, but sometimes, in trying to be understood, we scatter the essence of who we are into pieces too fragile to hold. The monk poured tea, not words. The stonecutter shaped stone, not arguments. The seamstress stitched care into fabric, not into sides. Their truth did not diminish for being quiet. It deepened. So take a breath now and ask, not with urgency, but with tenderness. What in you has been speaking too loudly because it forgot that it already belongs? What might you protect more gently if you remembered that your soul does not need to explain itself in order to be real? Let the silence cradle you now, like soft linen laid gently across your chest. There is nothing left to prove tonight. No more explanations to offer. No more reasons to rehearse. The ones who need to understand will or won't, but your peace does not depend on that. It never did. Feel how stillness holds you, not because you withdrew, but because you finally arrived, fully, honestly, and without apology. There's a quiet strength in knowing you don't have to be understood to be whole. You don't have to be seen to be real. You don't have to be explained to exist with meaning. So breathe softly. Let your story rest. Let your soul unfold inward, like a flower that blooms only at night, without waiting for eyes to witness it. And in this silence, you belong. And now, from the quiet of not needing to explain, you are gently invited even deeper into the realm of perception itself. For when words fall away, what remains begins to reveal everything. Imagine walking barefoot through a pine forest at dawn. Dew clings to the needles. Each step sinks slightly into soft, untouched moss. You hear no voices, only the distant call of a bird and the slow cracking of sunlight through tall trees. There's no narration, no one telling you what this means. And yet, you begin to see more, not just with your eyes, but with something beneath them. This is the gift of speaking less, not as silence for silence sake, but as an opening, a space in which life begins to speak for itself. Tonight, we enter that space, the place where vision sharpens, not because you know more, but because you finally stopped trying to say everything. Where meaning arrives not through explanation, but through attention. Let the hush gather around you like fog clinging to stone, and from within that hush, let seeing begin. A narrow path wound through a grove of camphor trees, their leaves rustling like soft paper in the breeze. At the end of that path sat a gate with no door, just an open archway that led into the courtyard of a small temple where an old Zen master spent his days, tending the moss and listening to the wind move through bamboo. He rarely spoke, though many sought his wisdom, and so the temple grew quiet, known not for sermons, but for the silence that lived within its walls. One afternoon, a young disciple arrived, eager, sharp, overflowing with thought. He had come from a faraway monastery where debates were common and knowledge was prized. He asked to stay and learn. The master nodded once and handed him a broom. Each day, the young man swept the same courtyard, and each day he tried to speak. "Master," he would say, "I have thoughts about impermanence." No reply. "I read a commentary on detachment." Still silence. Until one morning, frustrated, he asked, "Why won't you answer me?" The master looked up from the basin he was rinsing and said only, "When your tongue moves less, your eyes may begin to open." The next day, the young man said nothing. But as he swept the courtyard, he noticed something he hadn't before, how the fallen leaves gathered in the corners, not chaotically, but with a kind of pattern. How the breeze shifted the dust in rhythm with the trees. How even his own breath fell in step with the stirring air. And suddenly, everything began to speak. not in language, but in presence. We are taught that wisdom is found in words, but sometimes the most profound teachings come not through what is said, but through what we learn to notice when we no longer need to speak. So pause now and let this question rest gently in the quiet corners of your mind. What have you missed seeing because you were too busy trying to be heard? Far beyond the fields where the cicadas sang and the roads grew faint, a solitary farmer lived in a small hut, shaded by tall persimmon trees. He had once been known in the village for his wit, quick with stories, sharp with replies, a man whose voice often filled tea houses with laughter and debate. But as seasons passed, something shifted. He began to speak less. He stopped joining the village discussions. He declined invitations. And then one spring, he simply stopped speaking altogether. People grew curious. Some said he had grown bitter. Others believed he had gone mad from grief. But no one truly knew. One day, a traveling monk came upon the farmer's hut. Seeing the rows of vegetables, the smooth, swept path, and the way the stones around the well were arranged in perfect harmony, he approached respectfully and bowed. The farmer said nothing, only motioned for the monk to sit beneath the trees. For hours they sat. No words, no gestures, just the sound of wind and a bamboo ladle filling the stone basin with water. At sunset the monk rose, bowed again, and finally asked, "Why did you stop speaking?" The farmer looked at him calmly and said, "Because I began to see too much." The monk didn't press. Later, he wrote in his journal, "Some people speak to discover, others stop speaking and begin to see." In Zen, this is the quiet unraveling, when one no longer seeks to shape the world with language, but instead allows the world to reveal itself as it is, without the need to interpret. Without the veil of commentary, the farmer hadn't abandoned the world. He had entered it more fully than ever before. And now, as your own breath returns to its natural rhythm, you might begin to notice something too, what truth has always been in front of you, waiting for you to stop talking long enough to see it. Along the bend of a winding stream, where herons stalked the shallows and reeds swayed like whispered prayers, a weaver made her home. Her loom was placed just beside the open window, where the morning light filtered through like strands of gold, illuminating the delicate threads in her hands. She was known for weaving robes of such subtle beauty. They seemed to shimmer without color. People often asked her how she did it, what secrets she held, what techniques she used, what materials she preferred. She always smiled, bowed slightly, and returned to her weaving. Not a word spoken. One day, a visitor arrived, a scholar from the capital, eager to learn from her. He brought books, scrolls, questions. He sat beside her, narrating his thoughts, theories, interpretations of every thread she touched. She did not respond. Frustrated, he finally demanded, "If you know so much, why won't you share it?" She paused, turned to him, and pointed to the half-woven robe. Its pattern looked like the flow of river mist over stone. "Do you see it?" she asked softly. "Would it still be what it is, if I had to explain every strand as I wove?" He was silent. That evening, as the lanterns were lit and the moon rose over the fields, the scholar stayed behind and watched her weave without words. And in that silence, he began to see how her hands moved with breath, how her body followed the rhythm of stillness, how her presence infused each thread, not with knowledge, but with being. Some wisdom cannot be transferred through instruction. It must be sensed, received, lived. She taught him everything and never spoke a word. In a world addicted to articulation, there is something sacred about living in such a way that others feel more simply by your presence than they ever could by your explanations. So now, In the soft hush of your own awareness, ask gently, what in your life could begin to shine if you simply lived it, instead of trying to explain it? Now the silence is not something outside of you. It breathes with you. You've followed the quiet footsteps of a Zen master who swept without words, a farmer who gave up speech to begin truly seeing, a weaver who let her hands speak louder than her voice. And in their stillness, something awakened, not because they added more to the world, but because they subtracted just enough to reveal what was always there. Each of them embodied the same truth, that when we speak less, we see more. We live in a time where insight is often drowned by explanation, where meaning is suffocated by too much interpretation. But underneath all of that, beneath the commentary, the reasoning, the need to express, lives a clarity untouched by words. And that clarity cannot be taught. It can only be noticed. You may find it in the way light moves across your floor at sunrise, in the pause before you answer someone, in the breath you choose to take before reacting. These are not small things. They are moments when life begins to speak, if only we are quiet enough to listen. So pause now and let this question unfold gently within you, like a flower opening in moonlight. What have you been trying to explain, defend, or describe that might only be understood by simply letting it be seen? And now, let the stillness draw around you like a soft blanket, pulled gently up to the chin of your soul. You do not need to say more. You do not need to know more. You do not even need to understand, only to rest. Let your breath fall into the rhythm of silence, a rhythm older than thought, older than speech, the rhythm of leaves drifting on water, of moonlight tracing the edge of a rooftop, of eyes that see without needing to name. There is nothing left to describe, because everything you were seeking to say is already present in your being. So let the words dissolve, let your body soften, let your seeing remain, and in this quiet, let the truth begin. And now, from the softened space where words no longer chase meaning, we step into a gentler truth, one that doesn't reach outward, but downward. It doesn't announce. It doesn't bloom too quickly. It waits, patiently, where no one sees. You may imagine yourself in a still garden just after rain. The soil is dark, heavy, fragrant. Beneath your bare feet, something is shifting, not loudly, but deeply. You cannot see it, but you feel it, that quiet strength beneath the surface. Tonight's journey leads us here, not to the branches, but to the roots. Because in silence, things grow in ways they never could in noise. In stillness, life does its most sacred work, not rushing to be seen, but anchoring itself where it cannot be shaken. You don't need to show anything tonight. You don't need to explain, convince, or prove. You are not in the season of blooming. You are in the season of rooting, and the silence is your soil. There was once a small temple nestled at the base of a forested cliff, where mist lingered even past midday, and the sound of dripping water echoed like a forgotten chant. It was not famous. No master lived there, just a young monk and his aging teacher, tending to the grounds with the quiet rhythm of earth and breath. The young monk, newly ordained, was eager to grow. Each morning he sat in zazen longer than instructed. He recited sutras with vigor, swept the grounds twice, and polished the temple bells until they shone like mirrors. But after months, he began to fidget with doubt. "Master," he said one morning, frustration in his voice, "I've done everything. I meditate, I chant, I work harder than anyone, but I don't feel different. I don't feel enlightened. Why?" The old teacher didn't answer. He simply motioned to a small pine sapling planted behind the temple. "Do you hear it growing?" he asked. The young monk tilted his head. No, the master smiled gently. And yet it grows. That evening, the young monk sat beside the sapling in silence. He watched as the mist wrapped around it, as dew settled on its needles, as shadows shifted without hurry. And for the first time, he stopped striving. He began to sit, not to become something, but to be with something. In our search for progress, we often mistake movement for growth. We push, perform, and strive to be seen, even by ourselves. But true transformation happens quietly, like roots beneath soil. There is no applause, no milestones, just deepening. So tonight, as the breath falls softer into your belly, let this question unfold like a seed in your chest. What part of you is already growing, even if you cannot yet see the bloom? There was a village tucked into a bend of the mountain where the river slowed and turned to glass. Among its simple homes was one that sat half covered in ivy, where a woman once lived who had been known in her youth as a singer. Her voice, they said, could quiet storms. She had sung for temples, for emperors, for lovers and grieving mothers. But now she was silent. Her neighbors wondered why. Some whispered it was heartbreak. Others blamed illness, but no one truly knew. One winter evening, a great storm came down the valley, wind howling, trees bending, roofs rattling. The villagers huddled indoors, fearful. At dawn, when the storm broke, they stepped outside to assess the damage. Fallen branches, scattered tiles. But the ivy-covered house stood untouched. A young girl who had admired the woman's songs for years finally gathered the courage to knock on her door. "Why don't you sing anymore?" she asked, eyes wide with curiosity. The woman looked at her, smiled softly, and replied, "Because I am still listening." The girl didn't understand, not then, but over time, she came to notice something different. The way birds gathered near the woman's garden, how the wind felt softer by her gate, how her silence, somehow, made everything else sound clearer. In Zen there are seasons of letting go, not through despair, but through depth. Times when the voice quiets, not out of loss, but because the soul is rooting itself beyond sound, into something deeper than expression. The woman's silence wasn't absence, it was absorption, a descent into the earth of herself, where she no longer needed to be heard in order to belong. And now, in this quiet of your own breath, ask softly, what part of you is no longer singing, because it is slowly becoming the song? Beyond the hills where the morning fog kisses the earth and vanishes before noon, there was a solitary shrine no larger than a single room. The villagers rarely visited, not because it was forgotten, but because it asked nothing. No offerings, no incense, just presence. An old caretaker lived there, one who barely spoke. He spent his days gathering firewood, sweeping leaves, and placing stones just so, always with a kind of reverence that made even the birds pause mid-flight. Travelers came and went, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. One such traveler arrived, burdened not by baggage, but by urgency. A pilgrim who had studied with great teachers, crossed vast deserts, filled journals with questions. He had fasted, knelt, and listened. Yet still, peace evaded him. He asked the caretaker, "What practice do you follow? What scriptures do you recite? What brought you to understanding?" The old man pointed to the garden, small, wild, and silent. The traveler frowned. "There's no path here," the caretaker smiled faintly and said, "That's why the roots never get disturbed." And suddenly, the traveler noticed. The moss was thicker here, the stones warmer to the touch, the stillness more alive, not because of what was done, but because of what was not disturbed. He stayed, for weeks. No answers, no teachings, just dawn light on stones. Birdsong at dusk, the slow unfurling of roots in his own soul. In Buddhist thought, this is the return to non-doing. The realization that some of the most profound shifts happen not through effort or noise, but through non-interference, a deep respect for the unfolding process of life. Like a tree that deepens its roots, not by reaching up, but by resting still, quietly, persistently, into the earth. And maybe now, you too can ask yourself, what in your life might begin to root, if you stop trying to find the path and simply stayed still long enough for it to grow beneath you. Now, as the hush deepens around you and within you, the images of the garden, the river, and the shrine return, not as memories, but as mirrors. The young monk waiting to feel transformed, the singer who stopped singing to listen more deeply, the traveler who realized the path was not something to walk, but something to allow. Each of them moved into the same direction, not upward, not forward, but inward and downward. Because in silence, roots grow, not the kind of growth others applaud, not the kind that is seen or celebrated, but the kind that holds you in storms, the kind that knows without knowing how, the kind that whispers, I do not need to rise yet. Let me deepen. In this world that rushes toward the next bloom, the next result, the next visible proof of becoming, it is easy to forget that the real strength, the real stability, is built in secret. And now, as you lie here, quiet, still, unseen, let yourself wonder, what if this season of your life is not meant for blossoming, but for rooting? What if silence is not the space between growth, but the growth itself? No answers, just the question. Let it rest in your chest, like a seed. Now everything softens. There is no more growing to do tonight, no unfolding to force, no light to chase. Only this, a quiet, rooted presence, like the seed beneath the soil, still unseen, but fully alive. Let your body rest the way earth holds roots, gently, completely, without condition. Let the breath move through you, as if the wind is passing through tall grasses. No resistance, no shape to hold. There is no path to follow, because you are already home. Let the silence remain, let the roots deepen, and let sleep carry you into that sacred dark, where all true becoming begins. And now, as the soil of your inner world grows quieter, a new kind of message begins to rise, not as a voice, but as a gesture. Not loud, not bold, just steady, like breath on a window pane, or the scent of tea steeping in a quiet room. There are seasons where effort is loud, where beginnings demand attention, but then come the seasons of tending, slow, unannounced, invisible to others, and it is in those seasons that something profound begins to take shape, not with noise, not with applause, but in the quiet work that no one sees. Tonight, we walk into that space. A space where your work, your practice, your becoming, doesn't need to declare itself, because when it is rooted, when it is honest, when it is full, it will speak on its own. You won't need to shout. You won't even need to raise your voice, because real work whispers long before it echoes. Let yourself arrive here, where presence is the proof, where silence isn't the absence of action, but its most refined form, where what you create begins to speak long before you ever say a word. In a village nestled between two hills, there lived a potter known only by the quiet rhythm of his wheel. He had no sign above his door, no apprentices, no displays of his craft, yet travelers found him. Word of mouth carried his name like a breeze, soft but sure. Each day, he sat cross-legged by his window, turning clay without haste. He didn't speak while working. When people came to buy, he nodded, handed them the finished piece, and accepted whatever coin they offered. He never advertised, never praised his own work. One year, a merchant from the city arrived. Curious, he had heard that the potter's bowls were used in temples and royal kitchens alike. But when he arrived, he found only a small hut, no shelves, no fanfare, just the potter, shaping a bowl with hands that moved like wind over water. The merchant scoffed. "If your work is so revered, why hide it here?" The potter looked up. "Because the bowl will speak when it's ready," he said. "If I shout before it's fired, I distract the fire." The merchant didn't understand. He left with a bowl anyway, plain, unglazed, perfectly balanced. Years later, that same bowl sat in a museum, admired by thousands, not because it had been promoted, but because, in its quiet, it held something deeper. In a world rushing to be seen, the potter's wisdom was this: let your work be the one to knock. Let it find the door, not by volume, but by resonance. So as your own breath finds a slower rhythm, ask yourself gently, what might begin to echo if you stop trying to announce it before it's ready? Beyond the rice fields and the footpaths marked only by dew, there was a monastery built into the side of a cliff. It was carved not just from stone but from silence. No banners fluttered, no bells rang, and yet once a year monks from distant provinces made a pilgrimage there, not to hear teachings but to witness a garden. It wasn't large nor exotic. No rare flowers bloomed there, just stones, moss, water trickling over black rock, and one monk who tended it. He never came forward. He never greeted guests. He worked before dawn, raking paths, placing stones with a hand both precise and intuitive. When others visited, he retreated to the shadows, letting the garden speak in his place. Many questioned this. One visiting abbot, moved by the quiet harmony of the space, finally asked the elder of the monastery, "Why doesn't the gardener share his wisdom? Why remain hidden?" The elder replied, "He has no need to explain. You're standing in his words." And indeed, the lines of the gravel, the quiet curve of the path, the single white stone set at the corner of a shallow pond, they all spoke, not in language, but in stillness, not in logic, but in arrangement. His work whispered, and the world leaned in to listen. There are times in our lives when we confuse effort with impact, when we believe that being heard must come through voice, through volume, through visibility. But in truth, the most lasting work often moves quietly beneath the surface, shaping things without fanfare. And now, in this stillness of your own unfolding, perhaps you too can reflect. What part of your life is already speaking, even if you haven't yet said a word? Near the edge of an old forest, where lantern light flickered against stone at twilight, there lived a calligrapher whose works were never signed. Her brushstrokes graced scrolls that hung in temples, tea houses, and family homes, yet no one could say who created them. Some believed it was a monk in disguise. Others thought the artist had long since passed. But in truth, she was a woman who lived alone at the edge of the village, tending her small garden and boiling rice over a wood flame. She never claimed her art. She never sought credit. And still, her scrolls made their way into the world, through friends, neighbors, travelers passing through. One day, a scholar came to find her. He brought with him one of her scrolls, its ink so fluid it looked like mist woven through bamboo. "Why do you not sign your name?" he asked. She looked at the scroll for a long moment and replied, "Because I would rather the brush speak than the ego." The scholar pressed, "But don't you want others to know it was you?" She smiled. "If the words bring peace, what does it matter who shaped them?" That night, the scholar returned to his lodging, feeling both humbled and stirred. He had written volumes. He had signed them all. But he began to wonder which words had truly needed his name. In the way of Zen, there is a letting go, not just of possession, but of authorship, of needing your work to carry your reflection. When what you create is true, it will speak for itself, and it will find its path, not because you declare it, but because it carries the quiet weight of sincerity. So now, as your breath softens, let yourself ask gently, what are you creating? Not for attention, but because it longs to exist, even without your name attached. Now the stories begin to settle like ink on rice paper, soft, final, and clear. The potter, whose bowls carried the warmth of fire, but none of his pride. The gardener, whose paths spoke in patterns that outlived words. The calligrapher, whose brush danced not for applause, but for stillness. None of them raised their voices. None of them asked to be recognized. And yet, their work whispered its way into hearts and homes and temples across time. Because when something is made with quiet devotion, it carries a resonance beyond sound. It finds its way, not by shouting, but by being true. In this world, it's easy to believe that our value depends on visibility, that unless we are acknowledged, we are invisible, that unless we are credited, we haven't contributed. But Zen teaches us something more enduring, that when we move from sincerity, what we create will carry our presence, even when our name is forgotten. So take a breath here, in the hush of your own unfolding, and ask not how loud your work should be, but instead, what are you building so honestly, so silently, that one day it might speak for you, long after you've stopped speaking. And now let the silence return, not as emptiness, but as completion. There is no need to speak of your work tonight, no need to display it, defend it, or decorate it with explanation. Let it rest, let it root, let it hum quietly in the background of your breath. Because what you are shaping, with your hands, your thoughts, your quiet devotion, is already beginning to whisper. It does not need to shout. The tree does not announce its fruit. The moon does not boast its glow. And your work, born of stillness, will shine when the time is right, and not a moment sooner. Let go now. Let sleep receive you the way a garden receives dusk. Gently, slowly, without asking for anything in return. Let your breath be enough. Let your silence speak. Let your presence remain. And now, from the still garden of unseen effort, we drift toward the final hush, the place beyond striving, beyond showing, beyond the need to explain. You've shaped, built, nurtured in silence. You've allowed your work to whisper, and now, something within you leans into its last soft unfolding. Imagine standing by a calm lake just before dawn. The sky has not yet lightened. The world holds its breath. You don't move, but the reflection on the water shifts. Something invisible has changed, not because you declared it, but because time, patience, and quiet care have taken their course. Tonight, we return to this truth, that silence is not the space before proof. Silence is the proof, not because it screams success, but because when the time is right, the tree that grew quietly in shadow reveals itself, not with noise, not with force, but with presence. Let your breath sink into that awareness, that what you have become doesn't need to speak. It simply is. It stands. It breathes. And that is more than enough. In a valley where the mist never fully lifts, and the wind hums softly through cedar groves, there lived a weaver whose tapestries were never displayed. Her hands moved with quiet devotion, dyeing threads, stretching cloth, tying knots so small they vanished into the design. She never spoke of her work. She never invited anyone in. Still, once a year, one of her pieces would appear in the monastery hall at the new moon, folded, unmarked, placed beside the incense bowl. One season, a new monk arrived, young and curious, trained in cities where artists signed their names in gold. He asked the head abbot, "Who weaves these? The colors speak like prayer. The threads carry something ancient." The abbot smiled gently. "We do not know," he said. "She has never asked to be known." Unable to let it go, the monk followed whispers and footprints through forest paths and finally reached the weaver's home. She was old now, her back curved like a bowstring released. When he asked why she remained hidden, why she never took credit for what she had created, she only replied, "I was not weaving to be seen. I was weaving until the thread became quiet enough to hold what I couldn't say." The monk stayed silent. In time he returned to the monastery with no answers, only awe, and for the first time, he stopped signing his own teachings. He began leaving them unmarked, quiet offerings folded into the folds of daily life. When your heart has truly ripened, there is nothing left to prove. No signature needed, no announcement required. The work itself speaks, not with volume, but with gravity. And now, as your breath sinks lower, softer, ask yourself gently, what part of you is ready to be revealed, not by noise but by presence alone? High in the mountains where the snow melts slowly, feeding streams that sing only to those who listen, there stood a weathered hut beside a crumbling path. Inside lived a man who had once been renowned across the provinces, a swordsman turned teacher, a mind sharper than any blade he ever held. But for the last 20 years, he had disappeared from public view. Many believed he had died. Others assumed he had gone mad. But in truth, he had grown silent. One day, a prince from the south, eager to learn the way of inner mastery, arrived at the mountain's base with guards, scrolls, and questions. He climbed for 3 days, finally reaching the hut, exhausted and expectant. He bowed deeply. "Master, I have studied your words, memorized your teachings. Please, offer me one last lesson. Show me your wisdom." The old man looked at him quietly and gestured to the floor. Together they sat. Minutes passed, then hours. Not a word was spoken. The prince shifted, coughed, waited. When the sun began to sink behind the ridges, the old man rose, walked to the fire, and poured tea. He placed the cup in the prince's hands and said softly, "You've already received it." The prince's eyes welled with tears. What had once been said in lectures, in scrolls, in debates, now lived in the silence of his presence. There was nothing more to explain, because the master had become the lesson. In Zen, the final stage of knowing is not expression, but embodiment. When the student no longer hears teachings, but senses truth. When the master no longer teaches, but is. And so perhaps now, as your thoughts dim like lanterns in the mist, you too may reflect. What if your presence, quiet, steady, unspoken, has already become the proof you were once searching for in words? By the sea, where the tides move in rhythms older than language, there lived a woman in a driftwood cottage, surrounded by salt and silence. Fishermen called her the keeper, though no one could say exactly what she kept. She rarely spoke. She never left. Yet boats passed her shore each morning with a gentle bow of the oar, and children left smooth stones on her porch without asking why. Many years ago, she had been a healer. Her remedies saved countless lives. Her hands stitched wounds others feared to touch. But one day, without ceremony, she stopped. No one knew what changed. She packed her belongings, left the village, and built her cottage facing the sea. A storm came once, the kind that rips trees from roots and roofs from homes. Afterward, a young girl who had heard stories of the keeper walked the battered shoreline to find her. She expected fear, wreckage, sorrow. Instead, she found the woman calmly drying herbs by the window, humming to herself. The girl asked, "Aren't you going to tell us how to recover?" The woman looked up and said only, "When the ocean calms, you'll see what's still standing." And in that moment, the girl understood. Not every healing arrives in words. Not every wisdom comes in instructions. Some truths reveal themselves by what remains, quietly, surely, after all else has passed. There are times when your life speaks loudest, not when you act, but when you endure. When you say nothing, yet embody everything. When your stillness becomes a lighthouse, not because it calls attention, but because it never moved. So now, in the hush of your own breath, ask gently what in you has already proven itself, simply by surviving, by standing, by continuing on without a word. And now, as the tide of these stories recedes, what remains is not explanation, but essence. The weaver, whose thread held what she could never say aloud. The master, whose silence became the final transmission. The woman by the sea, whose stillness endured storms louder than any voice. None of them asked to be known, none sought applause, and yet their presence moved through the world like ink through water, subtle but irreversible. They understood that when something is true, it does not need defense. When something is whole, it does not beg to be seen. And when the work is real, silence is the final proof. In your own life, you may feel tempted to announce your healing, to name your becoming, to prove you are no longer who you once were. But perhaps, just perhaps, the transformation is already complete, and all that's left is to live it, quietly, fully, without the need for confirmation. Because what speaks loudest in this world is not volume, it is alignment, not certainty, but calm. So pause now and ask, not with your voice, but with the softness of your being. What truth within you no longer needs to be spoken, because it already lives in every step, every breath, every silence you carry. Let everything soften now, not only your body, but your need to be seen, your impulse to explain, your longing to be understood. There is no one to convince, no final word to say, nothing left to prove, just this breath, this quiet, this you, as you are. Feel how the silence no longer asks for your approval. It simply holds you, like ocean holds moonlight, like earth holds seed. There is no effort left, only presence. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the dark, slow, sacred, and still. And in that stillness, let it be known, without needing to be named. You have arrived, and your silence is enough. And now, beloved traveler of the quiet path, the stories have folded themselves back into the night, like petals closing with the coming moon, like waves retreating from the shore, not to disappear, but to rest. There is nothing more to seek, no lesson to hold, no direction left to follow, only the hush. Let it wrap around you like the soft hem of a temple robe. Let it gather in the space between your thoughts, gentle and unspoken. Imagine the last lanterns of the monastery dimming one by one, the scent of sandalwood still lingering, a breeze rustling through pine leaves without urgency. Everything now is returning, not to end, but to stillness. Your breath slows like water finding its still pool. Your body softens, like silk falling into the palm of the earth. And your mind floats now, untethered, no longer turning outward, no longer naming. The path has brought you home, not through answers but through the space between them. And here, in this space, you are safe, held, complete. There is no need to stay awake, no need to listen for what comes next. You may let go gently, completely, like mist dissolving into moonlight, like a whisper returning to silence. So rest now, drift. Let the night carry you, until only the breath remains, quiet, deep, and full of peace. Good night, dear one. You are already where you need to be.
you.